What if one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in British history was never truly unsolved but carefully managed from the very beginning? In the late summer of 1888, when fog rolled across London's East End and gas lamps trembled in the wind, a string of shocking events shook the heart of the empire. Newspapers named the faceless culprit Jack the Ripper, a name that would echo through more than a century of speculation, fear, and fascination. Yet, beneath the headlines and hysteria lies another story, one of confusion, politics, and deliberate silence. The deeper we look into the Ripper files, the more one question haunts every document. Did the authorities already know far more than they let on? Whitechapel at the time was a world within a world, a place of overcrowded lodgings, foreign voices, and factory smoke where thousands fought poverty and prejudice. It was also a perfect stage for rumor. The newly formed Metropolitan Police, desperate to prove its authority, found itself chasing shadows through alleys too narrow for truth. Letters arrived at Scotland Yard written in red ink and signed from hell. Crowds gathered outside every station. Politicians demanded results. But behind closed doors, investigators disagreed over almost everything: the timing, the motives, even whether the crimes were connected at all. Some constables whispered that they were following orders not to speak. This is where the official story starts to fray. One internal memorandum, now partially declassified, refers to sensitive implications at higher levels. No explanation follows. Another police note, dated October 80, mentions an unnamed medical gentleman of status who was briefly questioned then released for reasons not to be recorded. The file ends abruptly. What reasons could those have been? As public panic rose, Scotland Yard shifted its narrative from incompetence to enigma. A mysterious, almost supernatural killer was a much easier story to sell than internal failure. The legend of the perfect predator was born, and the institution's reputation survived. Even Taname, Jack the Ripper appears to have originated not from a genuine letter, but from inside the press office of the Central News Agency, a media invention that turned raw fear into marketable fascination. Once that myth took hold, it could never be challenged without dismantling the very system that created it. Over the next decades, crucial evidence quietly disappeared. Maps, witness statements, even clothing samples were logged out of archives but never returned. When World War II bombings later destroyed sections of the police archives, officials claimed most of the case files had perished, but inventory lists show that many key items were missing long before the bombs ever fell. In the 1960s, a retired inspector privately told a journalist that the truth was archived out of reach. He died before he could elaborate. Modern forensic research only adds to the uncertainty. DNA tests on preserved artifacts have produced partial matches to multiple individuals, but none have been definitive, and some were inexplicably contaminated. But how does contamination appear in sealed containers that hadn't been opened in a century? Perhaps because sealed has never meant untouched. Historians now believe that at least two official reviews, one in 1892 and another in 1920, quietly re-examined the material and removed items considered politically or socially disruptive. These actions left behind a curated version of Historia puzzle, missing its most dangerous pieces. Every generation since has tried to fill in those gaps. Writers have named suspects ranging from surgeons and artists to princes and priests, with each new theory reflecting the fears of its own era. Yet, the pattern that truly endures is one of institutional caution. Whenever evidence points upward toward influence, wealth, or authority, the trail suddenly goes cold. But whenever it points downward, poverty, or outsiders, it multiplies. This imbalance itself is evidence of intent. A new study of the surviving police reports shows that statements contradicting the official narrative were often filed as inadmissibly or inconsistent, while those supporting it were copied verbatim into the summary. Selective truth became official procedure. Then, in 2018, researchers uncovered a microfilm reel labeled H Division Restricted. Within it lay transcriptions of lost reports, with entire sentences blacked out in ink. One fragment reads, "Subject known to department, protection orders in effect." Another, fainter line adds, "Public disclosure unnecessary." The choice of words is chilling. Protection, not pursuit. Why would a suspect in the most notorious murder case in history be granted protection? The deeper you search, the more it feels as though the Ripper legend was allowed to live precisely because it kept eyes away from something larger. During the panic, Parliament introduced new surveillance measures, broader police authority, and funding for urban renewal projects that had been long stalled by political opposition. The chaos of 1888 achieved what years of debate could not. Fear-built infrastructure. The myth of the monster in the fog justified control of the streets and, indirectly, of the people who walked them. The Ripper may never have existed as one man, but he existed as policy. Even the geography tells a story. Mapping each crime scene forms a triangle that frames the heart of Old London's power district. An unintentional geometry, perhaps, or a reflection of who was drawing the map. Modern analysts using computer reconstruction found that the supposed randomness of the attacks aligns suspiciously well with known police patrol routes and illumination zones. The police would already know intimately. If that's a coincidence, it's a remarkable one. Among the overlooked records is a single, unsigned note recovered from a Scotland Yard ledger. End it where it began. No context, no signature. Some interpret it as a closure order, others as a cryptic clue. Whatever its meaning, the case officially concluded soon after. Decades later, when the archives were recatalogued, that same note had vanished again. The mystery became self-sustaining, with each loss of evidence feeding new speculation. Television, cinema, and books turned the unknown into entertainment. But the real fascination lies not in horror, but in omission. What other stories were altered by similar decisions? What other files remain sealed for the public interest? The more we study Jack the Ripper, the clearer it becomes that the legend endures not because it cannot be solved, but because solving it might reveal too much about how history is managed. The true legacy of Whitechapel is not terror, it's bureaucracy. The ink of secrecy dries much slower than blood. Each new generation uncovers fragments. A forgotten photograph, an unlisted memo, a pattern of edits in police ledgers. Piece by piece, they are reconstructing not the face of a killer, but the face of a government learning how to control a narrative through a mission. Standing in modern Whitechapel, where cafes now sit above ancient cellars, the air still feels heavy when the fog rolls in. Tourists follow marked paths, retracing fear as performance, unaware that beneath their feet once flowed the paper trail of a nation rewriting its own truth. Perhaps that is the enduring message of this case. Every society builds its monsters from the secrets it refuses to face. The police didn't just ignore certain evidence. Perhaps they also preserved something else. A lesson in how silence shapes memory. The name Jack the Ripper survives because it no longer belongs to a person. It belongs to a system that discovered just how much power can hide behind a myth. And so the fog remains, drifting through time, protecting both the legend and those who needed the legend to exist. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the stories. See you next time.